I going? Welcome to Self-Care Cinemas, where basically I do my nails while talking about a movie I've seen recently. So today I actually watched The Devil Wears Prada, and I have my opinions about this movie, but I'll save it to the end. Basically, we start off with a montage of very beautiful people getting ready to go to work or whatever they do during the day. And it's like a whole bunch of different women who look really, really good, you know, getting out of bed, making their, 10 almond snack and, putting on lingerie and kissing their gorgeous husbands goodbye. As compared to our main character, played by Anne Hathaway. Sorry, I just gotta stop for a second. Can we all just acknowledge that for some reason there were so many movies where we had to suspend our disbelief and watch Anne Hathaway pretend that she's ugly for the majority of the movies? Okay, Anne Hathaway. So, Anne Hathaway is strutting to work in her really frumpy coat and her deplorable haircut that no one would find acceptable ever, despite how non-fashion oriented they are. Winds up in this big building with lots and lots and lots of important looking people, where she meets my favorite character, Emily. And Emily is really sassy right off the bat. She's just like, oh, what is happening with this? And Andy, that's the Anne Hathaway's character, Andy, or Andrea, or later known as Andrea, is like, oh, I'm really interested in working here. And Emily's like, you actually have to be, interested in fashion. And then Andy, like, naively goes, what makes you think I'm not interested in fashion? And it's like, oh, God, no one in this building is wearing beige. Anyway, so Emily's about to interview her when Nigel comes in, and Nigel's all like, oh, guess what? The big boss lady's coming, early. I don't know why, but, reasons. And then he does this acknowledgement of the air in the room, and he's like, did somebody eat an onion bagel? And then Anne Hathaway adorably smells her breath. Weird. And then we see Meryl Streep's character. Meryl Streep waltzes in looking perfect, as per usual, and she's like, complaining to Emily about how everyone is incompetent and useless, and then she just is like, oh, who's this? Who's Anne Hathaway? And then they're like, oh, nobody important, and then she's like, well, send her in, because, you're incapable of choosing people who are actually good at what they do. And so Andy goes in, and she's talking to this, Meryl Streep woman, and she's like, I'm really smart and talented, and I've done, they keep mentioning her article that she wrote on the Janitors Union, which is like, okay. And so, Meryl Streep is like, you're not interested in fashion, you actually have no concept of fashion. And then Andy's like, well, I think that's an interpretation. And Meryl Streep is sitting there with her perfect, beautiful haircut and wearing her perfect cinched waist thing. And we looked at Anne Hathaway, and it's just like somebody cut her hair with kindergarten scissors, unironically. And it's just like, yeah, okay, that's so dumb. And she does this huge speech about how she's a hard worker and why everyone should consider her and things like that. And she's like, I can work very hard. And then she leaves, and Nigel reestablishes himself as the sassy man, and is like, who is that sad little person? Are we doing a before and after piece I didn't know about? Oh God, I've memorized this film. And so Anne Hathaway is almost about to leave, but then Meryl Streep calls her back in, and she's like, hey, we want you to work for us. And, we go to this, we meet Anne Hathaway's friends, who I personally despise throughout this movie. I think that they're actually horrible, deplorable people, and they're all just, shitting on her. And then you see the dynamic, which isn't healthy at all, where they start shitting on each other. And it's just like, I don't know. And then they go home, and then she has to wake up really early the next day and, like, bring her stuff and bring her coffee and, like, you know, commit to things. And she's wearing this really ugly sweater and dress or sweater and skirt, and it's just like, oh my god, could you hit it home any harder? And so, like, it doesn't make any sense, you know, to me. I don't really remember how it goes. It either goes, there's a belt scene. Oh no, it goes, she's like trying to eat food, and Nigel's making fun of her because, you know, skinny people don't eat food, don't eat carbs. He said something like, something's made out of cellulite, and she's like, oh, I guess none of the girls eat here. Which, I gotta tell you, I am just so unimpressed with that. I just don't understand the whole, you know, putting Anne Hathaway in as the ugly fat girl. Because literally in a couple of scenes later, she's like, hire the ugly fat girl. And it's like, I understand that you're trying to make a statement about the fashion industry, but why can't you actually hire, like, why can't you hire as a casting agent an ugly fat girl? Why does it have to be Anne Hathaway? Like, I don't know. Anyway, some kind of, like, schedule is moved up during their lunch, and Meryl Streep is, you know, freaking out, trying to pick out all these belts and stuff, and no one's working with her. And then this woman brings her over a belt, or two belts, and it's like, oh, which one, you know, which one? They're so similar. And then Anne Hathaway laughs, which sounded like the most fake, ill-acted laugh. But anyway, and she could have, like, so badly that when someone was just like, is something funny? She literally could have said, no, sorry, I just sneezed. Because it sounded like she sneezed or coughed or something. She's like, oh, you know, I'm still learning about this stuff. Like, the belts look exactly the same to me. And then Meryl Streep chews her out. She's like, look at that frumpy fucking sweater. Like, who are you? Like, and honestly, like, I felt like Meryl Streep was in the right. Like, I actually never saw this movie and was like, oh, Andy's, like, in the right. How could she be so mean to Andy? I always actually looked at this scene and was like, yeah. Like, obviously, like, there's so much money around this industry. A lot of people think of it as art, as important. Like, that's not, like, so hard to grasp. So why are you being so disrespectful, especially in this community that doesn't really think that you fit in here? So why are you just, like, hitting home how much you don't belong here? Anyway, so she goes home and bitches to her husband, or boyfriend, or whatever, and he's, like, really into it, like, strangely into it, and, like, she's just, like, and he's making her this, like, really burnt looking grilled cheese, and she's like, I'm not even hungry anymore. That's why all those girls are so skinny. And it's just like, oh, shut the fuck up, Anne Hathaway. And then he eats it, which I was like, are you kidding me? And then, anyway, it was just very interesting how they were, I don't know, doing this strange dynamic between the two. Anyway, she's trying really, really hard at her job, and, I don't know, she finally, you know, was trying really hard at her job, but, you know, she kind of, like, she's out with her dad, who doesn't really get it. He's like, why are you here? Like, you wanted to be a writer. You wanted to be a journalist. Oh my god, this fucking line. He's like, oh, I thought you wanted to be a journalist. Like, you got turned down by Yale Law School so that you could come here and write, and now you're not even doing that. And she's like, I'm writing those emails. Like, oh my god. This girl is not meant to be a journalist. You have to lie through your teeth as a journalist sometimes, don't you? One sec. I never really understood why they picked her career that she's going after as journalism, specifically because she would be a terrible journalist. Oh, as I was saying, she would be a terrible journalist. Like, wouldn't you just say to your dad, like, you know what, it's actually this really cool thing where I'm going to meet a lot of people, and I'm really looking forward to it. And you know what? The truth is, it is opening a lot of doors for me. Because, you know, if she looked up who, like in the first scene, she answers a phone call and it's like, I don't know, Gabbana. Like, isn't that something interesting? Wouldn't you just tell him, like, oh, I'm writing a piece on, you know, the fashion industry and stuff, and it's, you know, it's just look at it as undercover work, which no one ever does. Everyone looks at it as her not believing in herself and not staying true to herself, which I personally would have told off a whole lot of people before this point, you know, but whatever. Anyway, so she's planning on going to see a show with her dad, but who messes it up? Miranda calls her and is like, my flight was canceled. I don't know what to do. This is your job. Like, you need to find me a new flight home. And she's like, well, how bad's the weather? And it's literally a hurricane. Like, it's a hurricane. Like it's a hurricane. And so she's trying to call all these people and she can't find anyone to fly her out because it's a hurricane. And so they go and see, I think it was Chicago, but whatever, that's not, you know, really part of the story. Anyway, weird plug for Chicago. Where did the lid for this go? Guess I lost the lid for that. Oh, there it is. Anyway, so the next day she goes into work and Miranda's like, you're stupid. I had such high hopes for you. Like, you didn't really measure up. I don't know what to do with you. Like, you're a real disappointment. And, like, that was a little unfair, but whatever. And so, you know, she goes to Nigel to whine and she's like, Nigel, I'm trying so hard and nobody likes me. And then Nigel's like, oh my god. Like, seriously, girlfriend, get the fuck over it. Like, everyone works so... This is people's whole lives. This is not your life, and you're certainly not treating it like it's your life. And you're so disrespectful to everyone, and you look down on everything that we do. Like, why do you think no one is like, wow, good job, like, wow, way to go? It's because, like, we can replace you in a second and you're not even appreciative of what we do here. And he gives like kind of a tidbit into his own life. He's like, well, I don't know, like, as a guy who grew up with people who really didn't appreciate this industry, like, it's kind of, I think he said it's like a lighthouse or a beacon or something of hope or something. And it was just kind of really sad. And she's like, Nigel, help me. And then he does? Like, are you kidding? They go into the closet where I was so jealous of this scene. I was like, I want to go in there. And they do. And she gets so many clothes and things. And this is my favorite montage of the early 2000s, I gotta tell you. Normally it's this horrible, tremendous thing where it's like, oh, you know... we're gonna try on like a stupid amount of ugly, horrible clothes that no one in their right mind would ever wear. Ever. But now we found like the right outfit. No, this was a nice montage where, you know, they have different clips of her, way to work, and she's wearing all these, you know, cool outfits that they picked out for her, and they look so spanking good, except for like, some of them are kind of like, that's pretty 2000s. Remember when French style was in? Well, I do. Terrible time. So she's hanging out with her friends and they're actually like horrible people. Like, they're making fun of her. They're making fun of her job. Like, she's saying like, oh, these, you know, like, I've actually had a couple of really good experiences. Like, you know, there's actually a really interesting subculture behind fashion that really relates to me. And she gives all her friends all of this free, really, really, really expensive stuff. Like, she said to them, she was like, this phone is like $2,000. And there was a bag that's like $1,600 or something. And then Miranda calls her, and instead of like, you know, being like, oh, okay, they take her phone and fuck around with it, and then all she says is assholes, and then leaves. And it's like, okay? Then she goes to this party where she has to meet a designer. And she meets the designer, who's very attractive. And then she goes to the bar and she meets the other, like, love interest. Like the, you know, the rival, the love rival. And it's like, what a miscasting. Because he's obviously like 15, 20 years older than Anne Hathaway. And he immediately insults her. He's like, you can't do that job. You're not gonna be good at that job. And it's like, okay. You're not going to be good at that job. And then she's like, okay, I have to go because you're a dick. And so she leaves. Anyway, back to this thing. So she doesn't think she has to go to this gala, but Emily is sick and Miranda's like, you have to come with us because, you know, Emily is sick and we need you, you know, somebody who's not like, you know, sick and taking NyQuil and things to be on point and stuff. And so she's like, oh, okay, okie dokie. And so I honestly think she didn't even call her boyfriend to tell them that she wasn't going to be able to make it to the party. Which is pretty ridiculous, like, if you think about it. Why not call and tell them, like, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it. Please pick up the cake and stuff like that. But no, she instead goes to the gala in this beautiful dress and helps Miranda out. So Miranda's like, oh, you know, you are competent. And then when she's leaving, she runs into the writer guy. And he's like, hey, I have writing buddies in there. Do you want to come with me to meet them? And she's like, oh, I guess I could for a second. No, I have to go. And so she's late to her boyfriend's thing. But I would have been like, number one, I would have called and said, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it. Number two, I would have been like, hey, I met all these writer people. It was so worth it. But instead, she has nothing to say about it. And he's like, when she's like, can we even talk about this? And he's like, no, I'm just going to bed. And it's so like, anyway, she's doing really well at her work. And there's her boyfriend's birthday, and she's like, oh, I'm so excited, I get to hang out with my boyfriend on his birthday, got him so many presents, like, I just have to go and pick up the cake. And then they're like, no, Emily's sick, you have to come to the gala with us to make sure that we look really good for this gala. Now here's where I get a little pissed off at the relationship. Like, okay, I'll just finish the scene. So they go to the gala. She looks really hot. Anywho. So then she goes into work the next day. And Emily is livid. But in her hilarious Emily way. She's like, why didn't you just, you know, get into bed with her and ask her to read you a bedtime story? And she's like, I don't know. And so Miranda's like, okay, so I'm going to give you an impossible task because I hate you now. And you are going to go and get me my steak from a restaurant that's not open yet. And also my girls, my twin girls who are like literally assholes, want this, you know, the next Harry Potter book, which isn't even out yet. So how she expects her to do it, we don't know. The point is she wants her to fail so that she can fire her and yada, yada, yada. So, you know, obviously Andrea is stressed out, as, you know, you should be, as you can imagine. And so she actually gets the steak, and then Miranda's like, oh, what's that? I don't want that. I'm going to lunch with blah, blah, blah. And so then Andrea's pissed, and so she's like, I'm just going to quit because obviously I'm never going to be able to impress this woman, and I don't know what else I could possibly do. But then she has an epiphany. She's calling her boyfriend, she's like, I quit, and he's like, that's awesome, yay. And then she hangs up the phone with him, and she's like, oh, wait, that sexy that sexy man that I met might be able to help me. And so she calls him up and she's like, hey, I need a massive favor. Can you like totally, I don't know, get me the Harry Potter manuscript? And he's like, I don't know, yes. And so, like literally, I don't know, yeah. And so then he gets her the Harry Potter manuscript and she meets them at this restaurant. She gets it and then she goes and she kind of like flops it in front of Miranda as kind of like a fuck you. And so Miranda's like, oh, wow, one copy. What are my twins supposed to do with that? And she's like, no, I already got it booked and bound, and they're shipped to their grandmas, and they're reading it, and it's real great. And anything else that I can do with you? For you, sorry. Obviously wants nothing to do with her. And so then she's like, no. Like, obviously Miranda's pissed that she actually did it. But, like, you know, she did it. Like, she's an impressive girl now. And so the really interesting part of this for me, oh my god, this does not fit my finger. The really interesting part about this for me is that, like, really impressed, but really angry about this. Oh, the really interesting part about this for me is that she didn't immediately call her boyfriend and tell him, like, hey, guess what? That impossible situation that I was never going to be able to figure out, I figured it out. You should have seen the look on her face, like just in the bathroom, you know, just like talking to him. Just to let him know, like, hey, listen, like obviously he does not like her job. So he understandably comes home with celebratory stuff and he's like, this is the part where it gets like really uncomfortable because he's like, oh, you know, I got you these strawberries and they're like $17 or $5 a strawberry there or whatever. And she's like, yeah, by the way, I kinda didn't quit and I did really well, huh? Because she's working on the twin science project, which is stupid, but whatever. We'll go with it. And so then he's disappointed, and then she's like, don't you like me anymore? And then she like basically strips for him and they have sex and it's fine now, but I don't know, it's just like so uncomfortable because you know that, because like anyone in their right mind knows like that's not right, like that's not okay that everyone is so unsupportive of her and her aspirations that, yeah, I don't know, whatever. And so she goes to work and she's like, hey, my life is falling apart. And Nigel's like, yeah, like, like, tell me about it. I don't know. It's just so odd. Wow, this is actually looking pretty good. Surprised. Surprise. So then she, I don't know where to go from here. Basically, Miranda wants her to come to Paris with her, and she's like, I can't do that to Emily. Like, I just can't do that. You know what I mean? And then, coincidentally, she calls Emily the next day to tell her, like, hey, I'm gonna steal your trip to Paris, even though that's literally the only reason that you're alive right now. And Emily gets hit by a car. Oh my god. She gets hit by a car. All of her, you know, scarf apparel flies up into the sky. And, like, she's in the hospital, so she can't go to Paris now. And Andy is like, oh, yeah, I stole your spot to Paris, which I would have been like, yeah, I don't know why I called you. I was just like, you know, I need more Starbucks if you're passing by or something. Like, I wouldn't have told her. I just straight up would have not. I would not have told her a single thing. I would just been like, no, oh no, get hit by a car. And then she goes to her friend's art exhibition. And this is where things get really odd socially. Like, she goes to her friend's art exhibition. Her friend is clearly kind of high on herself, and it's like, fine, whatever. And then Andrea's looking at the art, and then all of a sudden, the rival love interest comes into play, and he's there for some reason. And he's just like, and he gives her like a peck on the cheek, which isn't, that bad, but I don't know, whatever. And so her friend sees her and tells her off. She's like, you're not the Andy that I knew. You thought this bar, like this dive bar was couture. Now you're like accepting cheek kisses from perfect strangers and like shit like that. And it's just like, I don't know, just, I'll get to it at the end. But then she runs into her boyfriend and she's like, I'm going to Paris. And he's like, you're going to Paris? Like, what? And then she's like, are you going to, like, get angry at me too? And then he's like, can we talk about this? And then she gets a phone call. And he's like, you know who you're in a relationship with? Whoever's on the other end of that phone. And it's so unbelievably rude. It's just unbelievably rude. And anyway, she ends up going to Paris where she meets the guy again, and they have sex, and it's the most disturbing lead-up scene ever, because she's obviously drunk off her ass. Like, drunk off her ass, and they have sex, and then she's like, she discovers this, makeup, not, makeup, but makeup, I actually did this so well, that's crazy. This magazine cover that is going to have Jacqueline, and Jacqueline as the editor. And Jacqueline is this person that Miranda absolutely hates for reasons we don't actually know. And so she, like, it's like, you can't do that to her. You can't take Miranda's job. And then he's like, baby, it's done. And she's like, I'm not your baby. And then she runs over to her and is trying to tell Miranda this thing. So the night before, she's like, celebrating with Nigel. So this is me going back and talking about this scene before. She's celebrating with Nigel because Nigel thinks that he's going to be the new editor-in-chief of something. And this is like the setup because, she got the dream job that she wanted. He's going to get the dream job that he wanted. And this is the thing. And she's just like, and he's just like, she's like, oh, we're going to miss you. And he's like, you bet your size 6 ass you're going to miss me. And then she's like, 4. And then he's like, oh, turn around, like, looking at her. But, like, she literally looks the same. And anyway, so, back to the thing about meeting the guy and going out to dinner with him and having sex with him. And so, yeah, so she's running around trying to tell Miranda, but Miranda's like, go away, I'm busy, I'm talking to people, like, stop, like, being weird and ruining stuff. And so, for some reason, Andy is, like, really worried about it, like, she's really worried that Miranda's gonna have her job taken away. And so, they finally get to the banquet dinner, and Miranda goes out to do her speech, and everyone thinks that Nigel is going to get his editing position, but instead they make it so that Jacqueline gets the editing position or something. And so, yeah, and it's just like, oh, and so Nigel's screwed over, the, sexy love interest guy, I guess, is screwed over. But yeah, it's all just like really weird. And so then Andy is in the car with, Miranda, and Miranda's like, oh, you thought I didn't know, but I have a whole list of people who said that they would follow me, and if I ever leave, they would come with me. So I, played my cards, and this is what happened. They'll never be able to replace me. And then Andrea's like, I'd never be able to do that. And then Miranda's like, you already did to Emily, which doesn't make any sense, but whatever. And so Andy gets out of the car, and then she goes over to this fountain and throws her phone in the fountain and then leaves, leaving Miranda on the steps alone. And the ending of this movie is so like, So she has this interview with, the New York Times, or, oh my God. She has this interview with the New York Times or whatever, and so she's like, hey, like, she meets her boyfriend again, and she's like, hey, Nick, and he comes in with the worst attitude. He plops down, he's like, I have 10 minutes before I have to get to work. And so she's like, okay, well, I just wanted to say to you that I'm sorry, and you were right, like, I wasn't following my dream, I was getting too caught up, and now I am following my dream, so there you go. And he has the most, answer ever. Like, he's like, oh, okay. Well, I got a job in Boston, and you're looking at the new, like, head sous chef, and I'm pretty sure they have Jarlsberg in Boston. And so, basically what he's saying to her is, oh, well, I got a job in Boston, do you want to follow me to Boston? And it's literally like, are you kidding? Like, you were such a dick throughout this whole thing. You were never, not once, supportive of her, and now you're being like, oh, come to Boston so, you can give up another dream of being potentially a journalist for the New York, whatever the hell. And, and she's like, and he's like, and it's just like so awkward and weird. So yeah. So I'm pretty sure they don't end up together. She gets the job at the New York, thing, and it's really nice to Emily, and gives her clothes that she got in Paris, which is really nice actually. And then she kind of runs in, like, she sees Miranda from across the street, and she waves, and Miranda whatever and it's like whatever, and she gets into the car and then smiles. Because there's never been a smile there's only one smile on record, because she's watching Andy walk down the street, dressed properly and stuff, not like a hobbit. And she smiles, and she goes back to her former self and tells the driver, go. And when I first watched this movie, I didn't really get it. Like, I didn't get why. Well, number one, because when I was a teenager, I was really stuck on the fact that every time they had someone portray an ugly character, it was literally a model, and it never seemed fair to me. Like, why are you always portraying, like, it just didn't make any sense to me. Like, why are you trying to force me to relate to this person who probably bullied me in high school? You know what I mean? And so that was the problem that I had when I was a teenager. But looking at the movie now, it's like, as an adult, myself, like, as a teenager, I could relate to it, because it was like, it felt like the world is against me. It feels like I'm the only one having my best, my best interests at heart. Like, that's not true. My parents are always there for me. I at least have one friend who understands what I go through at, moments in time. But this movie was like, no one, like, I understood what they were trying to say about the fashion industry in regards to women and how women are treated and how hard it is to be an aging woman. But in this movie, it wasn't like they were saying it just about the fashion industry. It was like they were saying it about, like, all of society. Like, her dad wasn't supportive. He couldn't even see that, she was trying and doing a good job at trying. Her fiance certainly wasn't supportive. Her friends weren't supportive. In fact, like, they were kind of actively trying to sabotage her, in my opinion. And no one was there for her. She was literally on her own the majority of the movie. Which I don't really... Number one, isn't all that realistic. If you've ever tried to do anything, like, yeah, it feels like you're by yourself, but it's nice to have that one person you can confide in. Everyone has that one person that you're like, you know what, like, I've had a really hard day. You can't go around pretending that there's not one person in your life who's willing to listen to you and support you in some type of way. So I really didn't understand, like, you can say that about the fashion industry, like they're really hardcore, even if you're beautiful, you're not beautiful enough, things like that, but like it was everyone in her life, so I didn't really get it. Also, a thing on the relationship, I didn't really understand, because if you've ever worked in a restaurant, it's long hours. It's not, get up at 12 in the afternoon, go to work, prep, have someone else clean up the dishes. It's basically you get up at 6 in the morning, go shopping for the produce, go to work, prep for lunch, do lunch, clean up after lunch, prep for dinner, do dinner, clean up after dinner. And he was, like, the boyfriend was treating it like, oh, like, I've never worked really late in my life. Like, I've never worked, I've never had to make sacrifices. Like, I've never had to sacrifice some form of the relationship to be able to make my work, work. And it was just kind of ridiculous because, where does that come from? Like, I also think that the rival love character was severely miscast. Like, I think that the casting director had seen The Mentalist, and so he sent in his headshot that he was from, The Mentalist, and the casting director was just like him. But then nobody said anything when he arrived on set. Like, why didn't anyone say, like, oh, you're 20 years older than what we thought you were going to be? Which I guess is kind of like playing into the plot where it's like, oh, people take advantage, like this is how sometimes people can take advantage, I guess, of, I don't know, women in the industry of fashion and stuff. But it's kind of like, yeah, did he really take advantage of her? I don't know. It was just kind of weird. It was kind of odd. This is not sticking. Okie dokie. Just once I would like these dual forms to fit. It fits my pinky. Wow. It's not sticking to dual form, it's sticking to my brush for some reason. Also, I don't really understand the relationship in that if she's planning on becoming a journalist, don't journalists have to, like, travel or something and stay up late and, like, do research and stuff? Like, I just didn't quite understand why he was so against her working so hard when being a journalist, like, the definition basically of journalism is working really hard basically all of the time. I don't know, there were just so many plot holes in this whole situation that was like, aww. Ooh, this is looking good.